They humiliated the quiet farmer a week later. Every Apache scout watched their homes. Eli was a quiet man who lived on the edge of a small valley, surrounded by rolling hills and wide fields of golden wheat. He had been born here, in a modest wooden house built by his father decades ago, and he had learned from a young age to respect the land. Every morning before the sun rose, he walked through his fields to check the soil, the crops, and the small stream that ran along the edge of his property. The water was cold and clear, reflecting the soft morning light as it bubbled over smooth stones. He would kneel beside the stream and touch the water, feeling its flow and making sure it was clean and strong enough for the crops and the few animals he kept. Eli lived a simple life, and he liked it that way. Unlike many people in the nearby town, he never rushed or worried about what others thought. He did not go to the market every day, nor did he spend his time gossiping. Instead, he focused on his work, making sure his small farm ran smoothly. He planted corn, wheat, and a few vegetables that he sold at the weekly market. He had a couple of cows and chickens that provided milk, eggs, and a small income. Life was not easy, but it was peaceful. Eli liked peace and he liked quiet. The townspeople knew of Eli, of course, but they rarely spoke with him. Some considered him strange because he did not attend the gatherings or the town events. Others thought he was shy or even weak. Yet those who had helped him once or twice on his farm knew he was clever and hardworking. He could fix a fence better than anyone else, and he had a way of reading the weather that made his crops grow even when others struggled. He had a quiet strength, though most people did not see it. One afternoon, Eli was repairing a fence along the edge of his property. The sun was high and bright, making the air feel heavy and warm. He worked slowly, carefully driving each post into the ground and weaving the wire between them with precision. His hands were strong from years of labor, and his movements were calm and steady. He did not rush, and he did not complain. The work was hard, but it was honest work, and Eli took pride in it. From the edge of the road, a group of townsmen came riding on horseback. They laughed loudly as they approached, making jokes and pointing at Eli. "Look at him," one of them said, "struggling with that fence like he's never done it before. Doesn't he know how to do anything right?" Another joined in, laughing. "I bet he couldn't lift a sack of flour without breaking his back." Eli heard their voices, but he did not look up. He did not shout back, nor did he try to scare them away. Instead, he continued his work, calmly hammering the posts and checking the wire. The townsmen laughed louder, thinking he was afraid or weak. They rode closer, calling out more jokes and teasing him openly. "Hey, quiet farmer," one of them shouted. "Do you even know how to hold a hammer?" Eli finally stood straight and wiped the sweat from his forehead. He glanced at them briefly, not with anger, but with a quiet patience that surprised the townsmen. He did not answer their insults. He did not show fear. He simply nodded once, turned back to the fence, and continued his work. The townsmen were confused. They had expected a reaction, perhaps a shout or an argument, but Eli gave them nothing. His silence was not weakness, it was calm observation. After a few moments, the townsmen laughed again and rode off, thinking they had made their point. They believed they had shamed Eli in front of the nearby fields and anyone who might have been watching. They did not realize that Eli had seen everything clearly. He had noticed their horses, their direction, the way they spoke to each other. He had even observed small details, the way one of the men kept touching a map in his saddlebag, or how another's boots were scuffed on the left side. Eli remembered these things, not out of fear, but because he had learned to watch and to understand his surroundings. Once they were gone, Eli returned to his work with a calm focus. He knew that mockery and insult were often tools people used when they felt insecure themselves. The townsmen had laughed at him because they did not understand patience, quiet strength, or the value of knowing the land. Eli had learned long ago that strength did not always show through words or actions that others could see. Sometimes the strongest power was hidden, built over time through careful observation and steady effort. As the day continued, Eli walked through his fields, checking each crop. The wheat was tall and healthy, bending slightly in the warm wind. The corn stood straight, and the small vegetables in the garden were green and firm. He smiled slightly, knowing his work was paying off. He had a quiet satisfaction that the townsmen could not understand. For Eli, success was measured not by the opinions of others, but by the results of his own careful work. When he returned to his home in the evening, the sky was painted with shades of orange and pink. He fed the chickens, milked the cow, and prepared a simple meal. The house was small but tidy, with clean floors, a warm hearth, and the scent of fresh bread. Eli ate quietly, thinking about the day, the work he had completed, and the people who had mocked him. He did not feel anger, only a steady determination. He knew that one day, the townsmen would see that quiet patience and careful planning could be far stronger than loud words or empty laughter. That night, as he lay down to sleep, Eli looked out the window at the dark hills surrounding his home. He could see the shapes of the trees and the small path that led down to the stream. He thought about the land, the crops, and the animals he cared for. He thought about the townsmen and their laughter, and he felt no fear or bitterness. Instead, he felt a quiet confidence. He knew the land, he knew the patterns of people, and he knew that patience and observation could protect him in ways that others might never understand. Eli's life was simple, but it was strong. He did not need attention, approval, or praise from anyone. He had his home, his farm, and the knowledge he had inherited from his father. The world could mock him, but it could not take away the skills, the wisdom, and the quiet strength that he had built over years of work. As he drifted off to sleep, he imagined the days ahead, knowing that the land would continue to provide, and that the lessons of patience and observation would guide him through whatever challenges came next. The next morning, Eli woke with the sun again, feeling the familiar coolness of the valley air. Birds sang softly from the trees, and the dew clung to the leaves, sparkling like tiny jewels. The world was quiet, and Eli appreciated this calm. It gave him time to think, to plan, and to notice details that others often missed. The day ahead was important, not because of grand events, but because even small, careful actions could make a difference in life. Eli began his morning routine by checking on the small animals he cared for. The chickens clucked softly as he refilled their water and scattered fresh feed across the yard. The cow lowed gently when he approached, nudging his hand for attention. Eli smiled, running his fingers along her soft coat. Caring for the animals was more than work. It was a lesson in patience, observation, and consistency. Just as he had learned to watch the land, he had learned to watch life itself, noticing small changes that others overlooked. After feeding the animals, Eli went to inspect his fences and the edges of his property. The previous day, the townsmen had mocked him while he worked on the fence, but today he paid attention to the details they had ignored. He noticed small weaknesses in the wood, tiny gaps where the wire had loosened, and areas where the soil was soft, which could make the posts unstable. He corrected each problem carefully, not in anger, but with the quiet satisfaction of someone who took pride in doing things right. As he worked, Eli reflected on the townsmen and their laughter. They had thought he was weak because he did not respond to their jokes. They had thought his silence meant fear, but Eli knew differently. Silence was a tool. It was a way to understand people, to watch their actions and words without giving away your own intentions. The townsmen did not know that his quiet demeanor hid intelligence, careful planning, and a deep knowledge of the land. By midday, the sun had climbed high, and Eli paused to rest. He sat beneath a large oak tree at the edge of his field, drinking water from a tin cup. He watched the hills, the stream, and the distant town. He noticed patterns in the movement of people and animals, small changes in the wind, and even the direction of the clouds. Everything had meaning if you took the time to observe. The townsmen, Eli thought, moved without care, laughing at the surface of life, but never noticing the details that could make all the difference. After his break, Eli returned to the farm with a new sense of purpose. He began preparing the land more carefully, ensuring the crops were well supported and healthy. He repaired small irrigation channels, cleared weeds, and checked the soil for moisture. Every action was deliberate. Every task had a reason. He was not rushing to finish quickly. He was building a foundation for the future. Eli knew that preparation mattered more than speed. It was preparation that turned quiet work into something meaningful, something that could protect and sustain life even when challenges appeared. Later that afternoon, as Eli worked, he noticed small signs that others would have missed. Footprints near the edge of his property showed where people had walked recently. Broken twigs indicated a path through the nearby trees. Even the patterns of the birds suggested that animals had sensed movement nearby. Eli did not panic. He simply observed, noting each detail in his mind. Every small clue added to the picture of the valley and its surroundings. It was this attention to detail that set him apart from the townsmen, who had mocked him without understanding how much he knew. Eli's work was interrupted by a messenger arriving from the town. It was a young boy, nervous and wide-eyed, carrying a small note. "Sir," he said politely, "these are from the town council." Eli took the note carefully, reading it. It was another form of mockery, a reminder of the previous day's laughter, and a suggestion that he should attend a meeting to discuss his incompetence. Eli folded the paper slowly and placed it in his pocket. He did not feel anger or shame. Instead, he felt calm resolve. Words could not harm him, only action could. Eli spent the rest of the day preparing for more than just his crops and animals. He began mapping the property carefully in his mind, noting every hill, stream, and tree. He considered how people might approach, where they could walk unnoticed, and how he could watch without being seen. To the townsmen, this would have seemed unnecessary, perhaps even strange. But Eli knew that knowledge of your surroundings was strength. Quiet observation, he thought, was often more powerful than shouting or rushing. As evening approached, Eli worked on small signals and markers around his home. He placed stones in patterns that only he could understand. He adjusted small fences and paths to guide movement, ensuring that he could always see anyone who came near. These actions were subtle, almost invisible, but they created a network of information. He had learned these skills from the land itself, observing nature, animals, and travelers over many years. He understood patterns, timing, and how small adjustments could make a big difference. After his work, Eli paused again by the stream, watching the water flow and listening to its steady sound. The coolness of the water was comforting. He thought about the townsmen, their laughter, and the assumptions they made about him. They believed that mockery could break a person, but Eli knew that true strength was quiet. True strength was preparation, patience, and understanding. The laughter of others could not touch him because he had built something far stronger: knowledge, skill, and awareness. That night, Eli lit a small lamp and sat at his wooden table, reviewing the day's work in his mind. He considered the crops, the animals, the fences, and the subtle markers he had placed. Everything had a purpose. Everything contributed to his safety, his success, and his peace of mind. He thought about the townsmen, imagining what they might say tomorrow. Their mockery, he realized, was based on misunderstanding. They judged by appearances, by loud voices, and quick actions. Eli judged by observation, careful work, and foresight. Before going to bed, Eli stepped outside one last time. The moonlight bathed the valley in silver, and the stars twinkled in the clear sky. He walked slowly along the edge of his property, touching the posts of the fences, noting the stream, and listening to the quiet sounds of the night. Everything was in place, everything was prepared. He smiled softly, not for pride, but for the satisfaction of doing what was necessary, quietly, carefully, and well. Eli's life was simple, but it was full of meaning. He understood the land, the animals, and even the people around him better than most. He knew that patience and observation could turn a quiet life into a strong one, and that preparation could protect him even when others acted without thought. The townsmen had laughed and mocked, thinking they had power over him, but Eli knew the truth. Strength was not always loud, and intelligence was not always seen. The quiet farmer, unnoticed by many, had already begun to show the beginnings of a plan, one that would change how others saw him in the days to come. As Eli finally went to sleep, the sounds of the valley surrounded him: rustling leaves, the gentle flow of the stream, the occasional call of a night bird. He felt calm, confident, and ready. Tomorrow and the days after would reveal the results of his careful work, his observation, and his quiet strength. He did not need the approval of others. He only needed the land, his skills, and the patience that had always guided him. The following morning, Eli rose before dawn, as he always did. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine and damp earth from the night's dew. The valley was quiet, almost still, except for the soft murmur of the stream and the occasional call of a bird. Eli stepped outside his small wooden house and paused for a moment, breathing deeply. The world was calm, but he knew that preparation required careful attention to every detail. Today, he thought, would be a day to reinforce his understanding of his surroundings. He began by walking along the edges of his property, checking the fences he had repaired and the markers he had placed. Each post was solid, each wire taut, and the small stones he had arranged in patterns were exactly where he wanted them. Eli's attention to detail was remarkable. To the casual observer, his land might have looked like any other farm, but for someone who knew how to notice, the careful planning was obvious. He made mental notes of the sun's angle, the shadows cast by the trees, and the lines of sight from different positions on his property. Every aspect could serve a purpose, and Eli considered all of them carefully. After inspecting the fences, Eli moved toward the field where the corn had grown thick and tall. He walked slowly between the rows, feeling the soil with his hands and examining the leaves for any signs of stress or dryness. It was hard work, but it was satisfying. As he moved, he thought about the previous week, about the townsmen who had mocked him and laughed at his quiet ways. Eli did not feel anger toward them. Instead, he felt a calm determination. He knew that one day, they would see the value of patience, observation, and careful preparation. Once he finished checking the crops, Eli turned his attention to the paths and trails that led around his property. He had learned long ago that every movement could be observed, and that understanding the ways people approached could give him an advantage. He adjusted small branches, cleared minor obstructions, and placed tiny markers that only he could recognize. These markers served as a subtle guide, helping him track movement without alerting anyone else. To an outsider, the land appeared untouched, natural, and quiet, but to Eli, it was a map, a network of information waiting to be read. Eli spent the afternoon preparing for more than just his crops and fences. He thought about the world beyond his farm, the town, the travelers, and the scouts who occasionally passed through the hills. He knew that some of them were always watching, learning about the land and the people who lived there. To them, Eli might seem like an ordinary farmer, quiet and unassuming. But in truth, he had knowledge that went far beyond appearances. He understood patterns, timing, and observation. He knew that small actions, taken carefully, could have a big impact. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Eli paused near the stream to drink water and rest. He watched the reflections on the surface, noting how the light changed with the movement of clouds. Small ripples suggested that fish or other creatures were moving beneath, and he made mental notes of their positions. Every detail mattered. Even something as simple as the movement of water or the behavior of animals could provide valuable information. Eli had learned to read the land like a book, understanding its secrets through patience and attention. After resting, Eli returned to his home and gathered some tools and materials he had stored for special tasks. He carried small ropes, stakes, and cloth markers, all carefully arranged to be useful without being obvious. He worked quietly in the late afternoon, setting up small systems that could provide information about any movement near his home. He placed markers along the edges of the property, arranged stakes in patterns that would indicate direction, and tied cloth pieces in places that would move slightly in the wind. These were not meant to alarm anyone, but to inform Eli of the approach of visitors. While he worked, Eli thought about the townsmen again. They had laughed at him, believing they were stronger and smarter because they spoke loudly and mocked others. But Eli knew differently. Intelligence was not always obvious, and strength did not always show in words or appearances. His quiet planning, his careful observation, and his understanding of the land gave him power that others could not see. He felt no resentment, only calm satisfaction in knowing that patience and knowledge could outweigh arrogance and mockery. As evening approached, Eli moved to the top of a small ridge near his home. From this vantage point, he could see the surrounding hills, the path leading to the town, and the distant edges of the forest. He examined the land carefully, noting the points where someone might appear, the places that offered cover, and the areas that were fully exposed. He practiced observing from a distance, recognizing shapes, movements, and signs that most people would miss. This exercise was not for confrontation, but for understanding. Eli knew that awareness and preparation were the keys to safety and success. By nightfall, Eli had completed his preparations for the day. He walked along the boundaries of his property one last time, touching each post, examining each marker, and ensuring that everything was in place. The valley was calm under the moonlight, and the stars reflected in the stream, creating a peaceful scene. Eli paused for a moment, breathing deeply, feeling the satisfaction of careful work. He had not rushed, he had not been reckless, and he had not allowed the mockery of others to disturb his focus. That night, Eli sat by the small lamp in his home, reviewing everything he had done. He thought about the crops, the fences, the markers, and the trails. Every action had a purpose. Every small detail contributed to a larger plan, one that required patience, observation, and careful thought. He considered the visitors who might come, the travelers, the scouts, and even the townsmen who had laughed at him. They might think they understood the land, but Eli knew that his quiet work had prepared him in ways they could not imagine. As he prepared for sleep, Eli looked out of the window at the valley. The moon cast a silver glow across the hills, and the quiet rustle of leaves filled the night. He thought about the future, imagining how the days ahead would unfold. His preparations were not for conflict, but for awareness. He wanted to understand, to notice, and to respond with calm intelligence rather than impulsive action. The quiet farmer's strength was in his mind, his observation, and his patience, and he knew that the land itself would support him if he continued to pay attention. Eli finally lay down to rest, feeling the calm satisfaction of a day well spent. The valley was peaceful, and the night carried the promise of quiet learning. He knew that tomorrow would bring new opportunities to observe, prepare, and understand. The townsmen had mocked him, believing that their loud words and empty laughter were powerful. But Eli's quiet work had already begun to show its value. He had built systems of knowledge and observation that would allow him to see things others could not. In his sleep, Eli dreamed not of revenge or confrontation, but of understanding the land and the patterns of life within it. He saw the fields, the hills, and the stream as a network of information, each part connected to the other. He imagined the small markers and signals he had placed, invisible to anyone but useful to him. He dreamed of watching quietly, learning carefully, and moving with awareness. By the time the first light of dawn touched the valley, Eli was already awake again, thinking, observing, and planning. He moved through his home, preparing for another day of careful work. Every step, every action, and every observation mattered. He knew that his quiet patience, attention to detail, and understanding of the land would allow him to navigate challenges that others could not. The townsmen's laughter and mockery were now only background noise to a life of careful planning, observation, and strength hidden in quiet patience. The following morning, the valley was quiet as always, but Eli sensed a subtle shift in the air. The sun had just risen, casting golden light across the hills and fields, and the soft breeze carried the familiar sense of earth and growing crops. As he walked along the edge of his property, Eli noticed something new, faint footprints along the trail near the forest. They were small and cautious, barely noticeable, but to Eli's trained eyes they spoke volumes. Someone had been observing. He did not panic or feel threatened. Instead, he paused to study the footprints, tracing their path with his eyes. The impressions were light, deliberate, and careful, as if the person walking had wanted to remain unseen. Eli crouched low, examining the soil, noting the depth of the prints, the pattern of the steps, and even small broken twigs nearby. From these small clues, he could tell the direction the visitor had taken, how many people there might be, and the way they moved through the land. Eli straightened and walked slowly toward his home, thinking carefully. The presence of observers was not new, but it was unusual for them to come so close. His preparations, however, were already in place. The subtle markers, stakes, and signals he had arranged over the past days would quietly inform him of any movement near the property. To anyone else, the land appeared untouched, natural, and harmless, but Eli knew better. Every rock, every post, every piece of cloth served a purpose. He spent the morning checking each of these markers, ensuring they were positioned correctly. He adjusted a few stakes that had shifted overnight and smoothed the soil around a marker so it would catch impressions more clearly. He walked quietly, methodically, feeling the rhythm of the land and the flow of the streams. His heart was calm, his mind alert. This was not fear, it was awareness. By mid-morning, a distant rustle in the trees caught his attention. Eli paused, listening carefully. The sound was subtle but deliberate, the crunch of small feet moving through dry leaves. He looked toward the forest edge, noting the shadows and the movement of branches. From the direction and pattern, he recognized them immediately, Apache scouts. They were moving carefully, watching and learning, just as he had watched others in the past. Eli smiled softly, not with pride, but with appreciation. He had always respected the Apache scouts. They were skilled, observant, and patient, much like himself. To be noticed by them was a rare compliment. He continued his work calmly, deliberately showing nothing that would reveal his awareness too soon. He let the observers approach as much as they dared, giving them enough to see, but not enough to understand fully. The scouts moved with quiet discipline, stopping at intervals to peer around trees and examine the land. Eli's markers were effective. They noticed the subtle hints, the slight shifts in soil and the small stakes, and began to take interest. They understood that whoever had prepared this land had skill, patience, and knowledge far beyond what they expected. The quiet farmer they had assumed to be weak now appeared to be someone with experience and intelligence. Eli continued his morning tasks with calm precision, tending to the crops and animals as if nothing were happening. He refilled the chicken feed, checked the cow, and repaired a small irrigation channel that had shifted with the morning sun. To anyone watching, it seemed like an ordinary farm, but every action was purposeful. Every movement was deliberate. He was not only maintaining his home and land, but he was also sending subtle signals to the observers, careful, capable, and alert. By afternoon, the scouts had moved closer, finding vantage points that allowed them to watch without being noticed. They whispered to each other in low tones, sharing observations about the careful arrangements, the neatly maintained fences, and the small, clever markers that indicated someone had planned and thought through everything. Eli could sense their attention, though they did not know he was aware. He smiled quietly, appreciating the learning moment, both for himself and for them. He decided to take a short break, walking to the stream and sitting on a flat rock. He watched the water flow, noting the reflections of the trees and the way the sunlight danced on the surface. The sound of the stream was comforting, rhythmic, and steady. He observed small movements along the forest edge, shadows shifting as the scouts moved. Instead of feeling tension, Eli felt respect. These were skilled people, capable of understanding and learning, much like he himself had learned over the years. After resting, he returned to the fields to continue preparing subtle defenses. He adjusted the positions of some cloth markers so that the wind would move them slightly, indicating any approach to anyone familiar with such signals. He rearranged a few stakes so that the footprints would be easier to read. He worked with patience and care, taking his time to ensure everything was precise. Every small adjustment was another layer of information, invisible to those who did not know how to read it. As evening approached, the scouts had begun to understand the full scope of what they were seeing. The small farm was more than a farm. It was a well-prepared, organized home, maintained by someone who knew his land intimately. They could see the deliberate placement of fences, the subtle patterns in the soil, and the careful tending of crops. Even the movement of the animals suggested skillful handling. The quiet farmer they had underestimated now commanded respect without a word. Eli noticed the scouts moving closer again as the sun dipped toward the horizon. He observed their cautious approach from the porch of his home, making sure that everything he did appeared natural and ordinary. He fed the animals, adjusted a fence post, and checked the irrigation again. Each movement was deliberate, showing capability without revealing awareness. The scouts watched intently, their curiosity and respect growing with every action they observed. Night fell and Eli lit a small lamp in his home. The soft glow illuminated the carefully arranged spaces inside. Outside, the scouts paused at a safe distance, observing without disturbing. They could see the careful maintenance, the subtle markers, and the deliberate patterns in the land. Their admiration grew quietly. They understood that this was no ordinary farmer. He had patience, skill, and knowledge that far exceeded appearances. Eli prepared a simple meal, mindful of his actions. He moved slowly, deliberately, giving nothing away but continuing to show steady competence. The scouts remained hidden, learning from his movements, the quiet care he put into his home, and the calmness with which he handled each task. Every subtle signal spoke to them of intelligence, experience, and strength. Eli's patience had allowed him to earn their attention without confrontation, without words, and without unnecessary display. As he finally stepped outside one last time that night, Eli walked along the edge of the property, examining the fences and markers. The moonlight bathed the valley in silver, making the trees and fields look soft and quiet. He could sense the scouts nearby, watching, learning, and appreciating the care he had put into his land. He did not feel pride or arrogance, only calm satisfaction in knowing that his work and patience had earned respect without any conflict. He paused at the top of a small ridge, looking down at his farm and the valley below. The quiet scouts could be seen as shadows among the trees, careful, respectful, and attentive. Eli understood that respect could not be demanded. It had to be earned quietly with skill, patience, and careful observation. His mind was calm, his body rested, and his land prepared. He had shown that quiet patience and careful work were more powerful than loud words or mockery. Finally, as the night deepened, Eli returned to his home and prepared for sleep. The valley was quiet, the scouts hidden among the hills, and his animals safe. He felt a sense of peace that came from knowing he had done everything possible to maintain, protect, and understand his land. The work was not done for recognition, but for mastery, understanding, and preparation. Respect had been earned silently, and the lessons of patience and careful observation would continue to guide him. Eli lay down to sleep, listening to the soft rustle of leaves, the gentle flow of the stream, and the occasional call of a night bird. He knew that tomorrow would bring another day of quiet learning and observation. The scouts, watching silently, had seen more than he could have imagined, and yet he remained calm, knowing that his patience and quiet intelligence had created a powerful example. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over the valley, spreading light across the hills and fields. The golden wheat shimmered, and the small stream reflected the soft glow of dawn. Eli woke as usual, stretching his arms and taking a deep breath of the crisp morning air. He stepped outside, feeling the cool breeze against his face, and surveyed his land. Everything was in order, the fences were steady, the crops healthy, and the animals calm. Yet today felt different. Eli sensed that the quiet patience and careful work of the past days were about to reveal their effect. As he walked along the edges of his property, Eli noticed small signs that confirmed his thoughts. The Apache scouts, who had been observing him quietly from the hills, were moving slightly closer. They were careful, respectful, and methodical, keeping to the shadows while still studying every detail of the farm. Eli did not hurry or try to confront them. He simply continued his routine, calmly feeding the animals, checking the crops, and tending the fences. Every action was deliberate, showing skill, patience, and care. The scouts watched closely, noting how Eli handled each task. He milked the cow with steady hands, carefully avoiding spills. He checked the chickens and scattered feed evenly across the yard. He repaired a small section of fence with precision, making sure every wire was tight and every post secure. To the scouts, these actions were more than ordinary farm work. They were evidence of a man who understood his land, his animals, and his responsibilities in a way that demanded respect. Eli moved through his fields, examining the crops row by row. The corn was tall and healthy, the vegetables strong and firm, and the wheat bending gently in the wind. He adjusted small irrigation channels, ensuring that water flowed evenly and reached every section. He cleared weeds and examined the soil, feeling for dryness and noticing subtle changes in texture. Every movement was purposeful, every observation meaningful. Eli's work was not hurried or careless. It was careful, deliberate, and precise. As the morning passed, the scouts continued to observe, whispering quietly among themselves. They shared their findings, noting how Eli anticipated problems before they occurred, how he managed his animals with gentle authority, and how he had prepared subtle signals and markers around the property. They realized that the quiet farmer they had assumed to be weak was, in fact, highly skilled and knowledgeable. Their admiration grew with every action they observed. Eli noticed the subtle shadows of the scouts among the trees, though he did not make any sudden moves. He allowed them to learn without interference, understanding that respect is earned, not demanded. His previous experiences had taught him the value of patience and observation. Loud words and mockery might impress some, but careful work, knowledge, and quiet strength earned lasting respect. By midday, Eli decided to take a short break near the stream. He sat on a flat rock, letting the cool water flow over his fingers as he drank from his tin cup. He watched the ripples and reflections, noting the movements of small fish and insects. The scouts continued to observe from a distance, their focus on the patterns of his work and the care he showed for every detail. Eli smiled quietly, appreciating the lesson being learned without words or confrontation. After his break, Eli returned to the farm and began reinforcing the subtle markers and signals he had prepared earlier. He adjusted stakes, stones, and small cloth pieces to ensure they would accurately indicate movement around his property. He walked slowly and deliberately, checking each marker for placement and effectiveness. Everything was in order. The land appeared ordinary, but it was anything but ordinary to someone who knew how to read it. Eli had created a network of information, invisible to casual observers but clear to those who understood careful planning. As afternoon approached, the scouts moved even closer, testing their observations. They tried different angles, checking the fences, watching the animals, and studying the crops. They whispered to one another, recognizing that Eli's calm work and careful preparation were far beyond what they had expected. The quiet farmer, who had been mocked by the townsmen, now held their full attention and admiration. His actions demonstrated intelligence, patience, and skill in ways that words could never convey. Eli continued his routine, tending to the land and animals, maintaining his calm and deliberate pace. He repaired a small section of the fence where the wire had loosened and adjusted the water flow in the irrigation channels. Every movement was purposeful. Every action showed care and competence. The scouts observed silently, learning from his example and understanding the depth of knowledge and preparation that lay behind his quiet demeanor. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, Eli walked along the ridge near his home, surveying the entire property. He noted the paths, the fences, the fields, and the small signals he had placed. Everything was in balance. The scouts, hidden among the trees and shadows, watched with respect and admiration. They recognized the quiet strength and intelligence that had gone unnoticed by others. The townsmen, who had mocked him only days ago, could never have imagined the skill and patience that Eli possessed. Eli returned to his home as the evening light softened. He fed the animals one last time, checked the fences, and prepared a simple meal. The valley was peaceful, the air filled with the sense of earth, grass, and growing crops. He moved calmly through his tasks, showing no sign of hurry or stress. The scouts remained in their positions, observing the entire routine with careful attention, understanding that this quiet life was full of purpose, skill, and deliberate thought. Night fell, and Eli lit a small lamp in his home. The warm glow illuminated the carefully arranged spaces, reflecting his careful planning and attention to detail. Outside, the scouts stayed hidden, impressed by the farmer's quiet competence. They could see the subtle markers, the neat fences, and the careful handling of animals. Every action told a story of preparation, knowledge, and patience. Eli's work had earned their respect without a single word being exchanged. Eli prepared for sleep, but he stepped outside one last time to look at the stars. The valley was calm under the moonlight, and the stream reflected the silver glow. He thought about the days past, the mockery, the observation, the careful preparation, and the scouts' quiet attention. He realized that true strength did not come from being loud or dominant. It came from understanding, planning, and observing with patience. The townsmen had laughed, but their mockery could not touch him. His quiet work had created respect, learning, and admiration. Lying in bed, Eli reflected on the lesson of the past week. He had shown that knowledge and skill could be far stronger than empty words. He had earned the attention of those who watched, demonstrating patience, intelligence, and careful planning. The scouts' respect was a testament to the quiet power that comes from preparation and observation. Eli understood that real influence did not require confrontation. It required patience, foresight, and steady work. As he drifted to sleep, Eli felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The valley was quiet, the land safe and well-tended, and the lesson of patience and preparation had been proven. The townsmen's laughter was distant and meaningless, overshadowed by the quiet respect earned from careful observation and deliberate action. Eli had transformed what others thought of as weakness into undeniable strength. The night carried the sounds of the valley, rustling leaves, the gentle flow of the stream, and the soft calls of nocturnal birds. Eli slept peacefully, knowing that the land, his preparation, and his quiet strength would continue to guide him. He had shown that respect is earned through action, patience, and intelligence, not through shouting, mockery, or force. The Apache scouts would remember what they had seen, and even the townsmen, if they paid attention, might eventually understand that true strength is often quiet, steady, and deeply rooted in knowledge and preparation. By dawn, Eli was awake again, ready to greet a new day with the same calm focus. His land was thriving, his animals were safe, and his preparations had proven their worth. He knew that patience, observation, and deliberate action were the most powerful tools a person could have. He had faced mockery with quiet dignity and had turned it into respect, showing that a calm, prepared mind could overcome doubt, misunderstanding, and underestimation. Eli's story concluded not with conflict or confrontation, but with quiet triumph. The respect of those who observed him was the reward for careful work, patience, and intelligence. He had proven that true power lies not in loudness or force, but in understanding, preparation, and the quiet strength of a thoughtful life. The valley remained peaceful. The sun rose again, and Eli continued his life as he always had, working the land, tending his animals, and observing with patience and care. The lesson of the quiet farmer, mocked and underestimated, was clear. Respect is earned through action, skill, and intelligence, and the quiet mind can hold the greatest power of all.